Welcome to another episode of the Krytan Chronicler. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Anchor, and we're going to be following Eckhart on some more adventures yet again as he travels across Tyria in the game Guild Wars 2. But really, if you haven't figured that out by now, learn to read description boxes. Anyhow, what's happening here is Eckhart, our protagonist slash viewpoint, he is traveling the Shiverpeak mountains. You know, he's an explorer, that's what he does. But he realized that it was a little too dangerous for him to explore on his lonesome, so he has enlisted the aid of the Tyrian Adventure League, and you can see Zayat here. Zayat? I'm not really sure. I'm going to say Zayat from now on. But you can see underneath his name at the top there, he is a member of the Tyrian Adventure League. He's got the little tail suffix at the end of his name there. And this is me, I guess, really testing out the advantages of being in a guild. I figured, you know, I have all these guildmates now that I've joined the guild, and I'm all about adventure role-playing and exploring the world, so I might as well take advantage of that and, you know, ask for their help while exploring. And I really did need their help. I mean, I'd been playing in this area. I mean, I definitely wanted to get some role-playing done in this area just because it's so beautiful and expansive. But also because it was really tough. It was really dangerous, and I died several times trying to explore some of the caverns in the area. So I figured not only do I need a party, you know, to actually survive, but it would be nice to have some friends along to roleplay with, make it a bit more fun. So what I did was I just checked my guild roster, saw who was online. I also spoke over the guild chat, which they call it the Vox in character. And as I mentioned, the Vox, everything they say is in character. So Eckhart actually, you know, spoke into his magical Asuran device, asking the rest of the guild if any of them were available to help. And a few of them did reply. And you can see here, Baylan is now coming to pitch in her help as well. So I just thought I'd see how many guildmates I could roster together to explore a bit and also try out a new experiment, since it's been a while since we've seen Eckhart actually fiddle with things. He's mostly been trying to help out with all the chaos going on in Lion's Arch. But starting to move away from that and get back to completing his apprenticeship. And this is one of the nice things about being in a guild, is you have all these people who are not necessarily available all the time, but they are within reach. You can reach out to them, so you don't have to wander around aimlessly hoping to run into someone who might be a role player, because not everyone is going to be a role player. And even if they are a role player, they just might not be in the mood for it, or they might be a little shy. It's always a possibility. But luckily these two hopped along, and we're also working on getting Merida to join in as well. But Eckhart's got a new experiment. I thought, you know, I needed some sort of justification for why I'm asking all these different people to brave the shivering wilds of the Shiverpeaks. You know, it's very dangerous. They wouldn't just come out there for no reason. It's not the perfect place for a picnic, if you know what I mean. So he had to have some sort of reason. So I just came up with this very quick, I guess you could say it's a story, but it's more of just a plot line, a quick little detail, context for why Eckhart's out here. And it's basically that he has this this new solvent, this liquid, that he believes will react with magical materials. Basically a way, it's sort of like a litmus test, you could say, for magic. You pour the solvent on, you know, minerals, and if it reacts, that means the minerals have magical properties. If not, then it's just regular iron or silver or what have you. So that's why he's looking for all this ore, and luckily he's got Zayat and Baylan to help him look around. And the nice thing with a guild is you don't really need a context. You don't need to come up with an elaborate story to spend time, because you already have this association. You're already part of the same guild, and you already know these people, at least to some degree. So it's much easier to get involved in a roleplay together. But if you're meeting someone for the first time, then it's absolutely necessary to have some kind of reason, because you can imagine how weird it would be for you to just go up to a random person and say hi, and do you want to go for a walk out in these dangerous forests? You know, it wouldn't really make sense. So yeah, having a reason definitely makes it easier to meet people. And you can see there, I wasn't actually interested in collecting ore at all. I mean, I just walked away there. I didn't even collect that iron, because it wasn't really the important thing. The important thing for me was just having a chance to explore the area, and to do that with some friends along for the journey. But having that little context made it a bit nicer, made it make a bit more sense at the same time. But now Eckhart's going to get to the real reason I invited these guys along, which is, you know, to hopefully get to know them a bit more. So Eckart's going to interview them a little bit. And it's funny, I don't know if you saw, you probably noticed that guy run by there. The funny thing was, I was so invested in the role-playing and the conversation and what Eckhart was saying that I didn't even notice that when that happened. I didn't actually notice it until I put the video together and edited it together. So, I mean, people will try to troll you and try to seek attention all the time, especially on games like this, but the funny thing is, it doesn't really work. You don't even notice it, because if you're really having a great time role-playing, then that's where your attention is, and these things will just sort of slip by your radar completely undetected. But yeah, it's funny, I didn't really even notice that. And you can see here that the roleplay, it didn't interrupt the roleplay at all. And that's an important thing to remember if you run into trolls, or just anything that seems kind of out of the ordinary, like if the game starts glitching, or there's just a problem with your computer, because the roleplay kind of exists on its own plane. You know, it's on a separate level from what you actually see, and that's kind of the level between what's happening in the game and what's happening in your imagination. Because as I said before, the majority of role-playing takes place in your imagination. You know, when you imagine what this character's voice sounds like, or when they're emoting something that isn't actually a physical emote that their avatar can do, you know, if they make up an emote, then you're imagining them do that, even though their character is just actually standing still on the screen. So the same thing applies to trolls or anything out of the ordinary, because if you think about it, since it's all happening in your imagination anyways, there's no reason that those things should affect what you imagine. The same way I don't, like the way Eckhart doesn't actually see their names above their heads. You know, I can't actually, even though I can see their names, and I know that this person's name is Merida even before I start talking to her, Eckhart doesn't see that. So you kind of filter out certain details from what you see into what is actually going on. And so when it comes to trolls, you can just treat it the same way, you know? It's either you're not actually seeing it, or you can just make up some other kind of contextual reason for what's happening. You know, if somebody just starts typing in random letters and spamming it to everyone, either, you know, it's not really happening in the story because it's not relevant, or you can just assume that he's some crazy guy who went off his magical medication of some kind. You know, you can make any kind of justification you can. And the important thing is that it never really has to interrupt your roleplay. There's really nothing another player can do that can actually prevent you from telling a story with your friends. So it's a good thing to remember. I mean, it can be frustrating, but it's only frustrating if you let it frustrate you. But if you just sort of ignore it and focus on what's important, then it's surprising how little it actually matters. And now in the past, what I typically do is I will come up with a context for these characters to work together, usually in the form of one of Eckhart's wild experiments. And from there, I'll just kind of let it go wherever it will. I'll just sort of explore and get to know these characters, but I don't really have a plan of what's happening. This time was a little bit different because, as you saw at the beginning, I did kind of organize this get-together, so I knew it was going to take place. I didn't know who was going to come along, but I knew that I had some guildmates online, and I figured I'd see which of them was available. And so that part was planned, and also I am kind of steering them in a direction here because this other character who joined our party, he or she was another player who reached out to me, who mentioned they saw the video and was interested in, trying out a little role-playing. So I thought I'd kind of get our groups together and get everyone together for some group role-playing. And that's a thing that if you watch the show, if you're interested in role-playing or you are a role-player, then by all means, feel free to send me a message. I mean, you can see my... I don't know if you can see my actual gamer tag or whatever it is, but if you are interested in, or you do want to send me a message, just let me know and I can give you my gamer tag. And if I happen to be online, then yeah, for sure, send me a message, and if I'm available, then I'd be happy to roleplay with new people. I mean, that's kind of why I did the series, was in the hopes of getting to meet more role players. So that was the case with this character. I believe his name is Fasson. I don't know. It looks very French. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was Fasson, Faken. I don't even know how to pronounce it. But so he hopped along. We just basically ran into him, asked him, if he was exploring, and told him we were kind of a little lost, so asked if he could help guide us. Unfortunately, we didn't get to know him a little too much because the player did decide to switch characters, as you'll see in just a little bit here. But yeah, as I was saying, I did try to push it in a direction because I did want to get these two groups together. So we could meet up with this other character. Well. But of course, Eckhart, the important thing to remember is, even though this player and I were communicating, Eckhart had no idea who he was. So Eckhart was oblivious, and so from his perspective, he's just another traveler he ran into randomly. So as you'll remember in the last episode, I sort of realized that I could really use the environment to my advantage and incorporate it into the roleplay. I am about to sneeze, so I apologize in advance if that happens, but okay, I think it passed. Anyways, it's really important to incorporate the environment just because the environments are so complex and there's so many things to interact with, and it really is beautiful. I mean, I love this environment in particular, the mountains and all the wildlife, just the static wildlife, going about their existence in this virtual world. It was really overwhelming. So I was desperate to really use that and to make the environment part of the story that I was telling. So just like in the last episode, Eckhart was gathering resources, not only in character, but I was really using the game's resources as well. And so I figured I could take that a step further by using it as part of one of Eckhart's experiments. And he kind of explains what it is a little bit, but the reason he came up with this experiment to search for magical properties is because while he was in the Priory, he read a bit about Primordus, who is one of the Elder Dragons, if you're familiar with the lore at all. And Primordus apparently was originally encased in like a statue deep underneath the ground. It was deep under the ground. Only the dwarves had access to it. But it was a magical statue. It had magical properties, and it would emanate this magical energy that the dwarves realized.
We know so little.
They realized that they could use it to their advantage and use it to power their, devices. So Eckhart realizes, well, if physical objects can have this magical resonance, then maybe you could find iron ore or silver ore somewhere in the mountains that still contains this resonance of magic. And so that if that sounds like a complete jibber jabber nonsense pseudoscience, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I just sort of made it make enough sense for me, but you can see he tries to explain it to Baylan, and she's just like, yeah, that went way over my head. So it doesn't really matter if it actually makes sense, as long as it makes enough sense so that you have a reason, to pursue it. And so this is where they're stopping right now, is the Priory. That's what reminded him of Primordus. Because the Priory is really all about discovering history and seeing how historical knowledge can lead to, future endeavors and future assistance in fighting the dragons. So that's why this outpost is out here, run by the Priory. And I just love finding these little hidden places. I mean, I'm sure that if you do all the quests, then it has some sort of significance in one of those later, but just when you're free roaming and exploring this sort of sandbox that is Tyria, it really feels rewarding when you stumble upon these little special, not hidden, but places you wouldn't expect to find. And so right here, Fasson, as I'm just gonna call him from now on, so he realized that there were, I guess because there were too many thieves, because Merida and Baylan are also thieves, he said he wanted to switch to a different character just to give the party a bit more well-rounded in terms of skills. So he switched to this other character, Fresca, who we're gonna run into now. And personally, I don't think it's that necessary, I should say, because the designers of the game, cleverly enough, designed it so that, you could really have a party of all the same class, and it won't make it too boring, I should say. Because even though there's just so much freedom within how you create your character, and again, I'm talking about game mechanics, and promised myself I would avoid that, because there are plenty of other YouTube videos about game mechanics if you're curious about that. But I will touch on that a little bit, just because it does help role-playing. Because if you're role-playing a thief and your friend is also role-playing a thief and you want to have stories together, you don't want to be, limited by your class. You don't want to have to say like, it doesn't really make sense, we can't actually go to this dungeon because we won't have enough, a variety of skills. But luckily, the game has enough of a character customization that you can both be thieves and have very different skills, which was nice. So we ran into Fresca here. I believe it's a she. I'm not entirely sure, but again, I'm new to figuring out Asturan anatomy, but she was exploring the Shiverpeaks, as she explains, and was also a bit lost, so decided to join our party. And something as simple as that can be enough of a reason to join up with people, because you can imagine if you're exploring this very dangerous territory, then you're going to want to join a group of other people, improve your chances of survival, basically. But as I was saying, in terms of skills and the character customization, it's interesting because you can have the same class with very different skills. Similarly, the different classes will use, the same weapons, but in very different ways. You can see here, Baylan is using the two pistols, same as Eckhart. She has the same weapons, but she uses it in a starkly different way than Eckhart does. And I really love that about the engineer, the fact that they'll use two pistols, but they don't actually really use both pistols. If you look at his skills when he's fighting, he really only uses the one pistol, and he has his second pistol, which is just loaded with, you know, this incendiary powder, which he just used there, and he also has this adhesive, which can glue enemies to the floor. And I thought that was really neat, you know, really kind of taking... So when you can see now, Baylan is actually using both pistols when she fights, but it's because she's a thief and Eckhart's an engineer, so he's gonna have a more engineer approach. And so for role-playing, it also makes a lot more sense, because Eckhart, he's not the kind of guy who would go guns blazing into a battle, you know? He's not a gunslinger, I would say. He's a researcher. So it makes more sense for him to use these weapons in kind of unconventional ways, which I really like. And so Zayat has a very interesting, I guess, subplot going on with his character's story.
Attack my target!
He mentions he lost his flux matrix, I believe it's called. And that's, as he explains it, kind of the in-character explanation for how characters can fast travel. Because if you play the game, you know you can fast travel to certain waypoints. But if you're playing in character, then you need to have some sort of explanation for why your character can teleport everywhere. And so the explanation is that the Asuras have set up these waypoints all over Tyria. And so once you attune your flux matrix to this waypoint, then after that you can travel instantly to any of these points. And Zayat is explaining that he thinks his was stolen, which is why he can't fast travel. He has to either walk everywhere or use the Asura gates. And it's really interesting you brought that up, because that could also lead to another story in the future. And it's important to really pay attention to these sorts of things, because as long as you pay attention, then you will never run out of adventures to go on and stories to tell, because all the characters you're meeting, they have lives and they have problems that they have to deal with. And it's, you know, none of us want problems, but in the context of a story, they're very good things, because they can take you places. They can lead to interesting things. And you have to have some sort of conflict, and otherwise your character just won't do anything.
Hey!
Alright, so this is one of the examples of why I needed a party, because there's a pretty tough challenge up ahead. And as Eckhart knew, you know, he knew there would be Centaur in this territory. But he wouldn't be able to take them on all by himself, so it was lucky having the Adventure League. And so he's starting to realize why this guild formed, because, you know, all these people share a love of adventure, but they also realize that, you know, it can be dangerous, and you're better off traveling in a team. It's kind of why the Adventure League formed in the first place. Right here, I tried to open up the role-playing to this other character. I mean, I knew we had a pretty full party already, but at the same time, I'm always open to meeting other characters and other players. So when someone comes along, just in case they're a role player, I will try to introduce myself, or at the very least try to make it known to them that, like, if they want to role play, that they can always approach. Because as I've said before, some people are just shy, and some people are worried that, you know, they might be intruding. I mean, I've definitely intruded a few times on other people's roleplay, you know, unintentionally, of course, but it's good to let them know that, you know, if they want to jump in, that they're welcome to, and you'll get a lot more involvement that way and participation that way. But it seemed like she had her own business in here, so she went her own way. And also, I had a pretty large party already. I mean, this is the first time in a while, at least, that I had a full 5-person party. So we decided to storm this centaur camp, hoping to find, any kind of information about the area that might help Eckhart's experiment. It might have bit off more than we can chew, as you can see here.
You'll be feeling that one for days. Replenishing. I don't think well on the ground.
Armored up.
Use a hand over here.
Infuriate!
So fortunately we survived, and I decided to, again, use the environment to my advantage and kind of search this camp. Now, even though I couldn't actually, search through these crates, as I said, it mostly happens in your imagination anyways. So what Eckart's doing here is he's kind of searching through their supplies to see if he can find any information, or see if there's any maps or details about the minerals in the area that he'd be able to use for his experiment. And so he does notice a cave, as he mentions, there's a cave in the area, which may have minerals. And this is something I didn't exactly just make it up. I didn't make it up on the spot. If you noticed before, Fresca mentions that there's a cave with a witch in the area, a notorious witch who's sort of terrorizing the area. And so I listened to that, but again, Eckhart didn't really have a reason to go there. He's not going to risk his life just to get an achievement, because he's just an engineer. He doesn't know anything about achievements or leveling up, not from his perspective, anyways. So he had to have a reason to really go there. But at the same time, I was interested in exploring the area, and I'm always trying to get skill points and achievements, when I can. So I decided to use the map that Eckhart found as the justification, kind of like connecting the dots between one part of the story to another, by suggesting that there might be minerals in this cave, which also happens to be the same cave where this witch was located. And Baylan has this interesting obsession with hunting animals. I kind of get the impression that she's, I don't want to say poor, but you can choose your origin when you create a human, and so there's the commoners, there's the nobles, and then there's the street rats. And I have a feeling that she definitely chose street rat, because she's always kind of she even explains in a previous episode how she's not willing to donate any money because she has very little of her own, and she's always interested in working. And the first thing she asked about when Eckhart was looking for party members was is there going to be any payment for this job? So yeah, money is definitely always on her mind, and after that, of course, food. So I have a feeling that she's collecting her dinner for the next night or a few nights. Keep herself fed and keep herself sheltered. That seems to be a high priority for her. So yeah, I definitely get the impression. And it's nice because she does this through her actions. You see it through what she does and subtle things that she mentions in her emotes. She doesn't outright say like, oh, I'm hunting these things for food because that's how desperate I am for food right now. She implies certain things, and that's the best way to get to know a character, is when they don't just tell you about themselves. I mean, I know some games, I've been watching some other videos about World of Warcraft role-playing, because there is a role-playing server there. It's probably, one of the biggest places for role-players. And one of the interesting things about that game is you can actually create a bio for your character that other players can see. So, like, another person would click on your character, excuse me, and then there would be a little description of, who your character is and what they're doing and whether or not they're open to role-playing or if they have a closed role-playing going on. And so that can be interesting, it can be helpful when you're trying to find other role-players. But at the same time, I kind of prefer to just get to know a player and get to know a character by actually interacting with them. I mean, it could be easy enough for me to just go online and look at Baylan's character description online. But that would kind of spoil the surprise for me. I mean, the reason I roleplay is because to me it's a story. A story that you don't necessarily know the end to. You don't know all the mysteries. Even though you're helping to write it, you don't know how it's going to end. And that's the joy of reading any story, is, learning details about the characters and about the world. And the reward you feel, the rewarding feeling that you get when you learn these things. So it is rewarding the more you interact with the character, you get to know them a little bit more. And I've certainly known a few details about Baylan, but she's very secretive at the same time.
Feel the fury. And this is another example of another character kind of doing the same thing that I did with this experiment, which is coming up with a explanation without actually coming up with an explanation. Fresca explains how her golem is powered by a simple quantum string matrix, she says. But obviously it's not very simple if you don't know anything about Asuras. So, again, you can kind of fake it. It's pretty easy. It doesn't have to be, perfect. This isn't actually, real science. This is a magical world with magical devices. And, essentially, if... I remember a quote, actually, of this father asking his son, how do you kill a vampire? And the son's like, I don't know, do you stab him through the heart? And he's like, no, You use garlic. No. You expose them to sunlight. No, that's not it. It's like, well, then how do you kill a vampire? It's like, you can kill a vampire however you want to kill a vampire, because they don't exist. You're making them up. So the point of the story was that, you know, if you're dealing with something that isn't real, then you don't have to get, you know, distracted by details such as, you know, what is politically correct, you know? You can kind of make up your own explanations for things. As long as there is an explanation and that you're consistent with it and that you stick to it, then, yeah, you can say that vampires sparkle in the sunlight, you know, whatever you want. No one can really tell you if it's right or wrong. It doesn't make any sense.
Full woman nightmare, Noxia.
It's to kill rising.
Are you aware your pain is an illusion? Wrong and wrong again. Time to do some real damage. Feel my black ink seep into the river of your thought. Raven, wrap my soul in your dark wings.
We were fortunately able to get through that without Merida. She did have to leave just a bit before we came into the cave. And it was interesting because she chose that character, at least what she explained to me was that she chose that character because of the difficulty of the level of the area that we were in. Because she did have a number of different alts, and unfortunately if your alt isn't a high enough level, then they won't be able to explore certain areas of the game, which kind of bugs me. I mean, I wish, you know, your level didn't hinder you in any way. I wish it was more of a free exploration, like you could decide for yourself which direction to explore. So she decided to use her more higher level character. The interesting thing about alts is, I mean, I've never really been interested in having an alt, just because it kind of bugs me the fact that you can't, if you do have two characters, they can never be in the same place at the same time. That's the problem you run into with alts. So you might have these two characters who, you know, have all the same friends and, you know, they go to all the same places, and yet they, strangely enough, are never in the same room, which kind of, for me personally, just it breaks the immersion just a little bit. But on the other hand, having an alt can kind of expose you to different aspects of role-playing that you wouldn't otherwise see. Because if you're a human character, then you're not going to get invited to specific, you know, Sylvari-only events or stories. In fact, I even came across this one clandestine meeting of Sylvari, and I tried to get involved, but, you know, obviously it wouldn't make sense for an outsider, let alone a human, to be privy to, you know, Sylvari information. So if I had made it a Sylvari character, maybe I would have gotten to see that side of things. And there are also people who will create multiple characters that are, you know, even related to each other. I know a lot of people will create an entire family of characters, you know, brothers and sisters and parents, all in the same account. So it's all the same player, but different characters within the same family. And so that could be really interesting too, because that way you can, instead of creating a single character, you are creating a whole family of characters. But at the same time, you miss out on the ability of actually having those characters interact. You know, they can only ever interact in your imagination. You'll never actually see these two sisters having a conversation with each other, because you know, they can't both be online at the same time. That kind of ruins the whole alt, I guess, you know, obsession for me. It doesn't really appeal to me as much for that reason.
I need help.
I would much rather, I mean, if I did want to have a family of characters, which would be a great idea. I mean, it's more immersive and it gives more depth to your character if they, you know, actually have a family. You're gonna wonder where this person came from and who their parents are. So it would make more sense to me if, you know, I knew another player who was interested in doing that and we both together created a family. So that way, not only do we have all this backstory together, but then we could actually interact and roleplay together as, you know, brother and sister, or, you know, father and son, that sort of thing. So if you have friends at roleplayer who are interested in creating a family, or even just setting up some sort of like connection before you start playing, like say, you know, I want my character, before I start playing, I want him to have some relationships. I want him to have, you know, a best friend. So, you know, this person can be my character's best friend, and maybe they grew up together, maybe they were childhood friends. So it's a really good idea if you have other friends who roleplay to kind of set up different storylines together. Maybe come up with things, you know, talk about what your two characters, how they met, or, you know, what they were doing before the game started. And you can create really interesting relationships that way. That way you don't have to, you know, pretend that, oh, you know, my sister's coming. Oh, I forgot, I have to do something. I have to disappear suddenly just before my sister arrives. You know, you kind of have to make up these kind of funny and a little immersion breaking excuses for why your characters are never in the same room together. So yeah, it's, for me personally, I'd rather avoid that.
Replenishing.
So now Eckart's decided he's collected enough resources for his experiment, so they're on their way back to Holbrack, and which is the next destination on his travel list anyways. So it lined up perfectly. And I also decided to wrap things up just because it had been getting late. This is, you know, several hours, I think, after they started traveling together, that I've sort of cut and paste certain moments from. Unfortunately, I couldn't include everything, but just the important details.
We're not a hunting party.
And I decided that after that battle in the Witch's Cave, that, you know, what better place to find magical minerals than in a cave where, you know, witches living. And you could see even in the cave, there are all these beautiful diamonds and these glowing rocks. So I just sort of assumed that Eckhart collected a few of them before he left, and that would be enough of a reason for him to go back and start experimenting on the things he's collected. And one of the things I love about having a party like this together is you can have multiple conversations going on at once. You've seen it in the past too, when Eckhart was traveling to Lion's Arch. You know, he would be having a conversation at one time with one character, and then to be another few characters behind him having a separate conversation. And it really feels like,
Strong.
I don't know if you've ever played
He could snap our necks like twists.
certain RPGs
Oh,
like Dragon Age, where, you know, you'll be traveling and your companions will be having a conversation without you. It really gives you the feeling that the world doesn't revolve around you, which it sometimes does. I mean, I know certainly in games like Oblivion or those sort of open world games or Grand Theft Auto. It kind of feels like you're a god and you can do anything, and that no one else really matters except you, which, you know, if you like that feeling, I'm sure a lot of people would love that. But for me, it just takes me out of the experience. It reminds me that this is just a video game. It's not real. I prefer when you kind of feel like you're just one gear in this giant machine. It really makes you feel like the world is a big place. And so hearing conversations like that don't actually involve you, that are completely separate from you, it really adds to that feeling. So like when you're playing a game like Mass Effect and your other characters have in conversation without you, and that you just sort of walk in on, you know, you realize that things are going on even when you're not looking. You know, it's not like the world disappears when you turn your back on it. So it's really nice to see that, you know. And just there, you know, Baylan, as I was talking to Fresca, Baylan was just sort of going off on her own thing, talking to the Norns and talking about how small she felt. And so yeah, it really just adds so much character to the story. And so right here we had to part ways with Fresca. But I was really happy that that player reached out to me to roleplay together, because it's always nice to meet other players, and it's unexpected. You know, you don't want the story to be predictable. You want it to go in unexpected ways, so having another character along definitely helps that. And it was her that suggested we go into the cave in the first place, or at least she mentioned it. And if she hadn't mentioned it, I might not have seen it. I might have missed it altogether. So it was definitely valuable to have that player along. If you're wondering why we're headed back to Gendron Fields, essentially Zayat just mentioned that he had to use the Asura gate, so there he is running off. And we're just about to part ways with Baylan as well. So I'm going to let the video finish off here. But before I go, I do want to direct you to another YouTube series that I found about role-playing. It's by another YouTuber called The Human Floyd. And he has a role-playing series. It takes place in the Elder Scrolls Online. But again, it has a lot of different tips and strategies regarding role-playing that can apply to all forms. So I'll leave a link to that in the description box below the video. I should definitely check it out, and again, support role-playing and encourage role-playing in different places as much as you can. Once again, I've been your host, Anchor. This is the Krytan Chronicler, and remember, keep on role-playing.